JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: Eyes of Heaven may be my first foray into the world of anime games, but I'm a pretty big fan of the series, so I decided to talk about how I felt about this game. For a little backstory, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a manga series that's been ongoing since 1987, which has actually seen an anime adaptation in the past 5 years. Eyes of Heaven is a third-person fighting game made by CyberConnect 2, the makers of the Naruto Ultimate Ninja series. The game also marks the second time this company has made a fighting game on the series, the first being All-Star Battle, a more traditional fighting game. So the question is, does Eyes of Heaven compare to All-Star Battle, or are they two separate monsters? Before I get started, I need to make it very clear that I haven't played very much of All-Star Battle, but I will bring it up occasionally for comparison. I think it's fair to compare these two games' different styles because each one gives different avenues for character design. For instance, the Eyes of Heaven style, some characters have movement abilities that range from ziplining to walls or choosing to ride horseback. So which do I think is a better medium for the series? Personally, I think a traditional fighting game style would prove to make a more engaging game, but I appreciate the creativity the third-person perspective gives. All in all, the game has really solid gameplay with simple button mashing controls and a drop-down menu mapped to L1 that turns your face buttons into special moves. Everything aside from that is pretty standard. You punch your enemy and pummel them with specials before finishing them off with a super move. The standout feature though is this game's 2 vs 2 battle system, but it seems less exciting when you realize that that's the only method of gameplay. One of this game's biggest flaws, I think, is that while the game is a fighting game, the only offline options here are story mode and a 1v1 against a computer, meaning no local battles with your friends. See, the advantage the Ultimate Ninja games have on Eyes of Heaven is that they can be played locally among friends, like the vast majority of fighting games. To go even further, the online options of play are only 2v2 with players, or one player and a CPU versus another. This leaves a lot to be desired considering the online is terribly laggy with a non-existent player base. The game has a pretty comfortable amount of fan service with a large roster of characters from each separate part of the series. Each character's voice fits well and animations reflect abilities and accurate detail, with some characters even sharing special animations with their partner for dual heat attacks. A disappointing note about the dual ultra moves is that not very many of them seem to experiment, meaning that most are just the characters from the same chapter working together. I would have liked to see more creative animations like the two separate Dios interacting. So this leads to most people's complaint with a game like this, the roster. A big complaint I've seen, and pretty much agree with, is the abundance of clone characters. And mind you, this is a loose term. The selection has a handful of characters that look like reskins at face value, but usually have a little bit of change in their kit. The problem here is that it's easy to assume that your favorite character might have been missed out in favor of one of these duplicate characters, but I understand that that's probably just overreaction. Lastly, Eyes of Heaven boasts its own story supervised by the creator of the series with an original new design of Dio to be the antagonist. So the huge problem here is that the story masquerades as an original work, but to me it felt like a lazy way of shoving the characters into stages from other parts from the series. It would make sense that CyberConnect would want to try an original story as opposed to running you through the manga, but I think the Ultimate Ninja series did this much better. At the end of the day, the story just lazily uses plot devices as Steel Ball Run, and throws in some space continuum nonsense and gives up there. The story has very little cutscenes, so mostly you'll be switching between voice scenes of the cast standing in place and fighting pairs of enemies. There are a few moments where you may fight hordes of enemies or play poker, but both minigames are short-lived and resurrected from the dead to be played again later, which seemed like a lazy way to keep the formula fresh. But the worst sin here is that the story runs out of steam about halfway through and starts throwing dumb reasons for you to fight characters again, just to add unnecessary fluff to the game. Unfortunately, by this halfway mark, I had a lot of trouble staying interested at all once I started fighting in familiar locations over and over. From a presentation standpoint, this game fails as well to me. particularly with the loading screens, which are thrown between every cutscene, voice segment, and battle. Maybe I'm being picky at this point, but it felt to me like I spent a lot of time waiting for the game to load after picking my fighters. On another front, there are a bunch of small customization options that are hidden between 4 or 3 different menu pages with no easy means of previewing your choices. I'm sure it would be exciting to use some of the skins and poses I've unlocked, but it's such a pain that I just stuck with defaults. Lastly, the elephant in the room of this game is that the large amount of the characters' namesakes are based on real bands and musicians, and thus have to be translated differently to avoid breaking copyright laws. This is something that the anime has skirted around, and I honestly understand why, but it's really aggravating to read subtitles that say Zipperman, but when the voice actor is saying Sticky Fingers. In closing, I'm still having trouble deciding if this game was worth the $20 I spent when I caught this on a sale, so I can't really recommend that you buy it even for that price. Ultimately, it just felt like a lazy fan service baiting game. Just something to play one time and never come back to, especially since the shocking lack of no local multiplayer. So, I'd recommend only buy this if you truly think you need a JoJo game in your life, but don't be surprised if it doesn't feel like a labor of love project, and certainly don't buy it if you haven't read the manga up to this point, because the game will just spoil it for you.